Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon super session, Consumers 4K and the Next Gen Home Entertainment. I'm John Marino, Vice President Technology at NAB. The question is, which experience will most excite consumers? Our panel of experts will tackle this and more as we look toward the future where art and science merge, creating new opportunities for media companies as exciting new products enter the marketplace. Leading our super session today is Jimmy Schaeffler. Jimmy is Chairman and Chief Service Officer of the Carmel Group. Jimmy began his professional career with ABC Sports. He was also a direct broadcast satellite analyst for Paul Kagan Associates. Jimmy's written numerous articles and books and is often quoted in press articles on topics ranging from media to digital signage. Please join me in welcoming Jimmy and our executive panel.
Good afternoon. Today's NAB 2014 Super Session is Consumers 4K and Next Generation Home Entertainment. For the record, again, I am Jimmy Schaeffler of the Carmel Group. I am the moderator for this 2:30 to 3:30 session taking place Monday, April 7th in Las Vegas. Joining me on the stage at my left are, in alphabetical order by last name, Ubiquity's Darcini Antonellis, CEA's Brian Markwalter, Technicolor's Vince Pizzica, Disney ABC Network's Vince Roberts, and LG's John Taylor. Why this home entertainment topic? Well, I reached out to my industry colleagues, and the best response came from Michael Zink, a VP at Technicolor, who helped me craft the title and the description. We take into account both the software and hardware side of video entertainment in the U.S. household, and I call this the yin and the yang of home entertainment, the software and the hardware. In order to put this rather important but complicated topic into perspective, to help us all understand the ecosystem behind the entertainment in the home today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, I put together a few graphics for you. This first slide looks at the 3-year evolution of 4K, also known as Ultra High Definition or UHD TV, complements of the Consumer Electronics Association, along with several of the remaining slides also presented by the CEA. Here we see 2012, just a couple of years ago, on the left, as the unveiling of 4K TV, yet there are no sales units in that first year. 2013 in the middle means almost 50 total 4K ultra high definition TV models, with 40 of those 50 for consumers. 15 brands make 4K TV, yet the US lags behind the rest of the world in unit sales. And 2014 brings us to US 4K TV sales of 24 models, all by major consumer electronic brands, including curved screens and ranges of sizes from more than 100 inches to the more compact, less than 40-inch models. This next glossary slide looks at consumers' awareness of various new consumer TV terms, where everyone, and I note everyone, says they know that HD TV and high definition are what they are. 10% fewer people know what 3D TV means. 6 out of 10 say they know the term ultra high definition TV, and about a quarter of those surveyed by the CEA know what UHD TV or ultra high definition TV is when you call it 4K TV. So the point here is some terms have been taught to consumers and others need teaching still by both the software and hardware industries. About 1/10 of the US population today, or 35 million, say they have seen or heard of 4K TV or UHD TV at retail. Of those 35 million at retail, CEA surveys say that 2/3 have seen a retail display. A little over half have seen a retail promotion. About 1/3 have seen a retail demonstration, and about the same number have talked to a salesperson about 4K TV. The point here, retail is a prime 4K TV presentation point for consumers. Retail has done a lot so far, but there still is a huge consumer base, estimated at 9 out of 10, to still reach about 4K TV. As to answers to the question, how important is 4K TV to consumers? As a way to watch certain kinds of content, the big interest, which is the blue in this chart, again measured by CEA, is that more than 2/3 of those surveyed want to watch their movies and regular TV shows using 4K. Surprisingly, only about half of U.S. consumers think 4K is the mode for watching sports, and about 4 out of 10 say it would be important to watch news. Nature, documentaries, history, education, home movies, and even video games saw only about half of the surveyed folks saying 4K would be important for viewing that content. As for screen sizes, GfK Demand Projector notes that in both developing markets and in mature markets, the average screen size is growing. For 2014 globally, the average screen size will average about 40 inches. As for the future, we look here to a slide done by the Carmel Group that looks at worldwide unit sales growth. And here you see in the last several years at the 2011 to 2012 juncture that there was a dip, there was a slump in the industry tied to the world global economic slump. But slowly but surely it's growing back up. Not real quickly though. We estimate year-over-year growth 2013 to 2014 at about 1%. As for US 4K TV unit sales projections, again, very slow growth in the early years, but getting to almost 2.8 million by year-end 2017. As for home viewing patterns and trends, from a Harris Broadcast Imagine Entertainment Gates Air presentation I witnessed 3 weeks ago in New York City, some data they have collected from Nielsen, Ericsson, and Ofcom shows basically 3 key global trends, this one in the form of PC Pro's survey of consumers in the United Kingdom. Number one, in general, there is an increasing use of many kinds of second screens, especially by young people. Number two, more specifically, more video and TV is being watched by tablets and phones. And three, there is more and more simultaneous use of multiple screens while watching video and TV. And finally, a bit more consumer behavior here. PricewaterhouseCoopers surveyed the industry last year and found that, number one, linear live TV worldwide is growing, but slowly at 5% year over year. But the important thing here is that its share of the TV ad market is still quite huge at $160 billion. And number two, online video is growing at 5 times the rate of live or linear TV, but it is still just a very tiny revenue piece at a mere $5 billion estimated for last year. So, that's a snapshot of the entertainment ecosystem, and now we can talk a bit more about what will excite the consumer. Home entertainment is an important topic. Perhaps it would not be too much hyperbole to suggest that home entertainment is becoming the holy grail of the bigger ecosystem that makes up all of the U.S. video entertainment system. And now to our impressive set of panelists, who I first asked to introduce themselves briefly and their companies and why they are fit for this panel and this topic. We'll start with Ubiquity's Darcy Antonellis.
Thanks very much, Jimmy, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darcy Antonellis, and I'm CEO for Ubiquity. Our company is a multinational on-demand provider. We have our roots in digital, serving some 38 countries, 12.5 languages, in all forms of the TV environment and multi-platform support, both for managed services and technical solutions. And our client bases are MVPDs, telcos, over-the-top players, as well as the content providers, and we do as well licensed content.
Great. Brian Markwalter from the Consumer Electronics Association.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmy. It's good to be here. CEA is probably known to this group. A lot of times I have to say, well, CEA is the owner and producer of the Consumer Electronics Show of CES. So that's how we're known best, I think, outside. We also do standards for the industry, which is part of how we're involved in Ultra HD. And we do market research. Some of the data was quoted here, so we appreciate that. And then we advocate for the industry, and Ultra HD has been a big part of what's moving in our industry right now, so it's fun to be up here and talk about it.
Sitting in the middle is Vince Pizzica of Technicolor.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yes, I'm responsible for the technology and corporate development activities at Technicolor. We're a media and entertainment technology company, so we find ourselves in the middle of many of the activities associated with everything that's new and innovative around media entertainment. We take an interest in the production services, the way in which content is created and delivered, whether it's on physical media or on OTT services or in set-top boxes.
And Vince Roberts of ABC Disney Networks, and I'm going to remind my panelists, please talk very well into your microphone so the audience can hear you.
Sure, thank you, Jimmy. I'm Vince Roberts, the Executive Vice President of Global Operations and the Chief Technology Officer for the Disney ABC Television Group. In the media segment of the Walt Disney Company, we operate the ABC Television Network, all of the 8 owned television stations in the United States and all of the 8 major markets. And with our association with 239 affiliated stations, we have full coverage, obviously, of ABC television throughout the United States. In addition, is Disney Channel Worldwide, where we reach over 400 million eyeballs around the world with over 100 television channels that are really about branded Disney content. So it'd be Disney Channel, Disney XD, and Disney Junior, and then our other domestic operation of ABC Family and all of the programming and relationships therein. So it's a great team and a terrific coverage of television, so we like TV.
Thanks, Vince. And John Taylor of LG Electronics.
We love TV too. Some of you may be familiar with our company. You may have an LG refrigerator at home or an LG mobile phone in your pocket. We're a $52 billion global corporation with operations in 120 countries. My main responsibility is here in the United States, and ultra high definition is certainly a major focus for us here. I've personally been involved in HD TV since 1987, 1988, when the whole process was getting started, and there are some interesting parallels today to what we experienced then. But LG is very bullish, and we're excited to be here today. Thank you, Jimmy.
Great, thank you all. So we're going to start off with a little bit of interaction with the audience here, and to try and build a little bit of a dialogue and interaction with all of you individually. We wanted to first try and get a feel for what is the makeup of today's audience. And if you would, just raise your hand as I go through the categories. I think we hit the major ones. The first would be, how many are here from the technical engineering community? Okay, quite a number actually. I'd say maybe 10%. How many here from the production side of the community? Okay, another good number. I'd say about the same, a little more, 10% perhaps. How many from the press or media? Okay, good number there, maybe 5%. How many from the banker or analyst community? Oh, I don't see too many at all. Bankers need to get in there. There's a lot of money to be made here, right? Okay, content companies. Anybody from the content side of the business? Okay, more than I expected. Maybe more next year, I hope. Broadcast station management. How many broadcast station managers? Okay, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7. And any others that I didn't cover? Call out what you are real quick. Integrated. Education. Did I miss any? Okay, great. All right, another audience question. The title and description of our panel today identifies hardware and equipment on the one hand and software and content on the other. Which will do the most to lead to changes in home entertainment? Software or hardware? How many first in the audience think it would be software? Okay, I would say that's about maybe half, a little under half. How many think hardware? Okay, and that leaves out a lot of people. Hardware, I'd say, was about 10%. Okay, we're going to do what's called here a little bit of industry value hypothetical role playing. And because we have people up here that fill these roles, we're going to ask for 60-second concise comments by John Taylor and Brian Markwalter first, talking about why hardware, they agree with the hardware people, is going to lead to changes in the years ahead. And then we're going to go to Vince Roberts of Disney and Darcy Antonellis to cover the software, and then the gentleman in the middle, Mr. Pizzica, who wears both hats, just like Darcy wears both hats, will decide who won, or he'll add points to the conversation. So I'm going to start with John Taylor of LG. 60 seconds. Why will hardware lead the changes in home entertainment in the future?
I'm not sure I agree with the premise totally, because there's software and the hardware at the same time. But clearly, in order to enjoy ultra-high definition television, it all starts with the screen. It's this amazing screen with 8 million pixels, 4 times the resolution of HD TV that we've enjoyed for the last 15 years. But content is king, and content is what's going to help drive that. So even in the short term, as we're waiting for content to become on stream, consumers are embracing Ultra HD today. I can't speak for our competitors necessarily, but in the case of LG, we have very powerful upscaling that will give you an amazing Ultra HD experience when you're driving it with a 1080 Blu-ray or even off-air high-definition programming. So hardware is still the starting place, but software is going to be crucial.
Okay, Brian Markwalter, 60 seconds on hardware.
Okay, so I'm like John. I wouldn't say it's one to the exclusion of the other. We clearly need both. In this case, I'd say we're out a little bit with the displays, and part of the point of that slide showing the big transition at CES was how quickly we came to market with a full portfolio of really high-quality Ultra HD displays. But I think, and others will probably address this, the production end has been working with 4K for quite a while. We got to stitch these parts together to make the complete value system here, but we'll get there. And you know, just the data points we see from consumers are that if you can get them the experience, they really appreciate the improvement in picture quality.
Right, and so as to not put anybody specifically on the spot, Darcy here wears both hats. She does hardware, she does software, and so I'm just asking her on a hypothetical, let's help the industry understand this and the audience better. Talk to me for 60 seconds now about software.
Well, I think, start on the software side by definition to say it not only includes the creative side, and so let's look at, as for example, visual effects. Begin to be created and rendered and distributed in 4K Ultra HD, coupled with a native photography. That's an accretive and very valuable next step. On the software side, also relative to delivery. So I would say, as it relates to asset preservation, asset integrity. And ensuring that you can distribute the content in a robust and reliable way, so that its experience actually marries quite nicely to the display, the reception device.
Great. Vince Roberts, again on the software content side.
Sure. So for us, I'm big on the cloud and the cloud environments and how virtualization of our workflows will give us the ability to scale, whether it be our standard 2K delivery, SD, or even up to Ultra HD. And that's all about software. It's all about the ability to take that abstracted workflow, put it into an environment where I can scale it, I can spin up production when I need it, I can spin it down when I don't need it. But ultimately, in driving that value proposition, where we've got, for instance, today we're moving, just on our internal infrastructure, over 102 terabytes a day of data across our global internal networks. That's all software transport that puts my television content basically around the globe. So for us, that's where we're migrating. We're migrating all of our workflows, abstracted, virtualized, as much into the cloud as we possibly can.
Okay, and closing it up, Vince Pizzica, again a company that wears a software hat and a hardware hat. Who won?
That's a pretty tough question. I'm sure the audience is feeling the same way I am right now. I think the conclusion is that it's very hard to separate. It's very hard to separate the two. That you need to have success in a deployment around a great hardware experience and a great software content experience. But certainly, without content, the hardware isn't going to go anywhere. So we're compelled towards making sure that the content and the software makes the most of the hardware experience that's being that the gentlemen here are doing their best to get out in the market.
Okay, we are going to have plenty of time after this first couple of questions to talk about 4K, which is in the title and is obviously critically important. But my first question, I wanted to talk about, given bandwidth limitations, what gets the most emphasis when it comes to resolution, frame rate, dynamic range, and color gamut for our next generation video experience? For example, the content folks, if you were to so label them, might say resolution is the most important. What about that? Vince, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm all about better looking bits, just not more bits. So I've been advocating 20/20 color space. I want multiple frame rate capability. I want HDR functionality. I want 10-bit sampling, not 8-bit. I believe that for us to really push the envelope to draw a value proposition for the UHD marketplace, you've got to have something better than just higher bit rate. That is more bits on the screen. That said, including just a higher nit value, for me, and what I'm telling my internal folks is, we need that business plan and that value proposition for us to turn around and spend potentially hundreds of millions of dollars upgrading plant for what value proposition. I need a value proposition to go spend that kind of money, both to upgrade plant and to be able to drive that value to the consumer. And today we haven't really seen that yet. It remains to be seen, and perhaps some of my colleagues can talk about what is the value proposition to a broadcaster, because historically we don't get a lot of extra money for all of the additional upgrades and resolution that we have to do. It's going to cost me money in production. I've got to build all the infrastructure. I don't get a lot of additional revenue from commercials for any frame rate or any size of image. So we struggle a bit with that business plan and how to move forward with that. That said, on the 4K production side, you see a lot of tremendous production tools that are being displayed here at NAB. We have a tremendous amount of 4K infrastructure that we use for those workflows. For example, we're going to be delivering to Netflix, I believe it's 6 of our Marvel produced television shows that will be in the UHD format for Netflix. So in our TV animation group, we produce all of our content in 4K. Why? Because the graphics and the visual effects are much more effective to be able to use that space, but we down-res for the SD. But we have a library, and we'll continue to look at building a library for that future.
Okay, Vince Pizzica, I know Technicolor's looked at this question of a value proposition. Could you address what Vince just says yes?
Yeah, look, I think the broadcast environment makes it very hard until there's a very large customer base, lots of screens out there to justify what appear to be very large investments that are necessary to upgrade infrastructures and support total distribution for a channel. But there's no doubt that there are consumers that are going to be drawn towards a better UHD type experience on their product, and they're going to want to have the content there. OTT services, we think, are going to end up probably leading the charge. Netflix, as Vince said, being one of those, but there'll be others, including MGO, that we work with. So I think that there's going to be a range of investments that take not just that production environment, we know the content's being produced that way, and start to leverage some of the pieces that need to be put in place for distribution progressively, because the richer experiences, as Vince said, are going to come from high dynamic range, going to come from wider color gamuts, and even sensor technologies in the living room that might take advantage of the presence of what we know about people in the living room at the time. So the framework for that starts to come with UHD because we put in place things like HEVC.
Okay, we're going to move to any other new technologies. What else should we talk about besides that we just addressed, which is that higher frame rate, that dynamic range, all the rest of those? What else is there in new technology?
So I was going to maybe wrap up this previous discussion, because this is a common one if you are in any of these environments, is how do we spend our bits and what kind of pixels do we need to make this best experience. So I think the good news is that the TVs are getting out there, and we know from our consumer research that Like the interest, if you ask consumers before they get a demo, the interest in Ultra HD is in the 30% range. After they get a demo, it's in the 70% range. And we ask them questions. They'll at the one time tell you that picture quality is the most important factor. It's right there with cost in the upper 80% range. And they'll tell you, well, HD is good enough until they see Ultra HD. So there's definitely something there. I think we have to work through, you know, dynamic range, changes like the actual nits, you know, how we baseline the nits that we offer in the TVs. TVs can already do better than what we, you know, spec against. So, yeah, I think the positive side is there's room to meet the consumer once we get the dials set correctly.
Okay, and thank you for filling that in. John?
No, I would agree. I think that the consumer electronics industry is really leading the way here, and we have a challenge to help educate consumers about what this is all about. You know, all of our consumer research dovetails with CEAs that show that picture quality indeed is the top consideration when people are shopping for a new TV, and they've have embraced HD TV over the last decade, but seeing is believing. When they see it, they fall in love with it, and that's what Ultra HD TV is all about. And the simplest way to explain it to consumers is it's 4 times the resolution of what you have today. But it's more than just more pixels. It's, as you said, Vince, better pixels. And that's where things like the 10-bit color come into play. It's not something that's easy to communicate to consumers, but it will certainly enhance the overall viewing experience.
Okay. And we were touching on the topic before of new technologies. Is there anything else that's out there that we should be looking at that we haven't talked about?
There's a lot of trends in displays, and you're seeing flat displays, curved displays. The holy grail is going to be the marriage of OLED with its limitless contrast ratio and amazing color rendition with Ultra HD, and that's going to happen this fall.
Okay.
I think quantum dot that we saw a couple of years ago has a huge opportunity as well to sort of drive that visual space. But what's interesting about UHD development, if the demand reaches its critical mass and we have fixed, if you will, the pipe to the home, then that opens the door for more than just that UHD experience. It potentially opens the door for a richer immersive experience that may be agnostic of a UHD experience. So I think one of the benefits that I've been talking about with my colleagues on UHD is the fact that if infrastructure gets built out, so you've got a pretty good, not necessarily a QoS of 25 or 30 megabits to the home, and you've got that as an asymmetrical or as a symmetrical delivery mechanism, then the value proposition is about, well, what do you do with the bits instead of just putting in a traditional type of entertainment experience in a 16:9 format or whatever the square box ends up being? Does it give you more of that immersive space, whether it be a combination of first and second screen, or even with what quantum dot can do to do more than just a curved display? It can wrap around a room. A little bit of the holodeck that Star Trek talks about, but 10, 15 years, who knows where that's going to go as display technology continues to grow and change.
Okay. Darcy, 3 years ago, we'd be up here talking about 3D TV, and I think it's fair to say that 3D TV has waned in popularity somewhat. The glasses were indeed a tough sell. But is it too much hyperbole today to say that 3D TV is dead?
No, I wouldn't at all say that 3D TV is dead. I think starting with, again, a genre-specific approach to 3D with what is the content that I'm watching, and does that content lend itself to a 3D experience, is probably where you need to start. Where the confusion enters relative to the conversation is, 3D as a feature and the quality of 3D relative to the actual hardware and mechanism that you're using. Obviously, there is variability there, and absolutely, the glasses, have been have encumbered the overall experience, especially as you talk about things like we are all doing more than second screen types of activities, while we may be watching the big screen. So how does that play? So getting to that glassless, more frictionless kind of experience obviously is needed. But I don't think you can, in the strictest of terms, talk about 3D as being dead. You have to start with the content and say, where does it make sense? And then how do you carry that compelling experience all the way through to now displays that can give you that, the right viewing environment.
Great, thank you. And Brian, you could write a chapter in your book about 3D.
Sure. Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Well, I think Darcy's right. It probably got positioned too much as the next generation of TV, to use our title here, and not as a feature. So a lot of TVs shipped. It's a good experience, but it was not frictionless enough. And we know consumers need convenience. It's hard for them to figure out some of these things. So, and it's still shipping. As we sort of got into the mature phase, they've been out a couple of years. Our advice to consumers was, well, you won't go wrong. You're probably buying the best TV, the higher end, the best TVs were 3D capable. So you haven't lost anything in the process. But
okay, Vince, John, 3D. Some closing comments.
We never really agreed with the naysayers. I think our expectations about 3D were always lower than others, but we considered it an important feature. And I think regarding our discussion today, the 3D experience with ultra high definition is incredible. Mm-hmm. You have a larger screen. You have the benefits of the additional resolution that really starts to replicate that experience you have in the movie theater. So 3D is far from dead. It's probably going to find its way back in appointment viewing. These are that special movie that you want to watch with your family in Ultra HD with the glasses on.
Vince, Technicolor's thoughts on?
I don't think 3D informs the buying decision as much as it did. I don't think people are choosing a 3D TV because it's a 3D TV anymore. I think that I'm not even sure consumers are really caring as much about whether the movie is going to be the 3D version or not. We're forcing it down their throats a little bit, and they're giving that option, but I'm not sure everyone's taking advantage of it. I actually like the 3D experience, so from a personal perspective, I push it, but I'm not sure consumers are heavily drawn towards it. But I think we can make it better, and that's the drive we have, is to continue to take advantage of all of these other inputs that can improve the experience, including Ultra HD screens, etc. But it is we have to convince consumers that it's worth doing to go to the trouble of it, because it's still, there's something extra to do.
Yeah, I've got to say, in my mind, Avatar was the only 3D movie that I've ever seen that I was really captured by. It was just that excellent. So hats off to Mr. Cameron. I think that's one of the things that's interesting about this is what Darcy was saying, which is that when there's Vince, talk up. Speak up.
I try not to yell. So I think that there's a creative element in 3D, and that's an important part. And we start to see that in Ultra HD. I think you get, without really changing anything in the creative element, you get a greater experience, and people will be drawn to that because they can go in and they can see it's better, or they might just be drawn by the fact there's more pixels. So it's going to make a difference. With high dynamic range, I think we can convince the creatives that there is a better way of showing their story visually. Because if you've seen a high dynamic range TV, it's a fantastic experience. I mean, you really get blown away by that experience, and creatives will be drawn to telling the story better because of it. Whereas with 3D, I think they were a little bit, how do I take advantage of the perspectives? And it was a more complicated creative message.
Right. Vince Roberts, when you and I talked a little bit about 4K ultra high definition hitting a critical mass, we talked about a benchmark would be something like cable network ad sales reaching $20 to $25 million annually. Could you talk a little bit more about your thoughts about that critical mass milestone for 4K?
Yeah, it's not about the dollars, it's about the eyeballs. So to hit that critical mass, if one were to launch a 4K network that could be relatively well supported by the ad industry, is probably around more like the 40 million homes that make it practical for you to begin to sell ads. So there needs to be a tremendous amount of penetration in that space for any of us on the programming side to begin to consider launching a full-time 24/7 network doing specifically UHD. I mean, that doesn't scale very well unless you get that level of critical mass. I think the rollout that we're going to begin to see is more in the niche markets. It's going to be what Netflix is doing. It's going to be the VOD, that kind of unique user experience that can deliver that high quality content. That said, we do and have heard of some of the MVPDs are talking about launching full-time UHD channels, as well as DirecTV has made some movements in that direction. So we'll wait and see. And if it turns out that the right business opportunity is there, then content will be created or provisioned for those platforms. So we don't have any immediate plans right now to put a full-time network together. That's pretty far off in the future for us.
Lady, gentlemen, any other comments on? Okay. I'm going to go through quickly now, short answers each of you, questions I've identified which are ideal for just one of you. I encourage comments after the comments, but let me go first to Darcy and say, as a digital managed services and solutions provider, Darcy, what are your plans for supporting 4K TV? Your specific example. Sure.
For Vubiquity, and we announced actually last week a couple of things: a strategic partnership with Akamai, bundling obviously their worldwide network with our managed services and tech solutions, as well as the announcement of AnyView Cloud. And to Vince's point before, based on...
Which Vince?
Oh, sorry.
Not often you have that problem.
That's my job.
Yeah.
Make sure we clear it.
Yeah, sorry. I never have that issue. But AnyView Cloud, I mean, it's intended to provide, again, multi-format and the scalable support that things like Ultra HD are going to need. And so those are kind of two key things relative to the support of the new format.
Okay, another quick question, quick answers. Are there considerations that service providers might want to take into account relative to digital supply chain dependencies?
Yeah, I think the key dependencies, and I would note that we have received a number of requests relative to, as Vince Roberts mentioned, relative to different partners and clients looking to try out UHD services. So to that end, the things that we're supporting that are important to them that they need to be mindful of are librarying, overall tagging, data management, content management services, as well as obviously the integrity and robustness of their network to delivery to the client side. And so those are things that we're working most closely with our clients on.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you one quick clarification question. You mentioned a relationship with the content distribution network Akamai. Could you explain that just real briefly? Sure.
So because Vubiquity it has its roots in digital distribution. We've always been a digital company, and we clear more than half a billion eyeballs. So on the Akamai side, as a managed services provider, from licensing all the way through to literally marketing, programming, content management, and then ingestion right into, if you will, what will be the client's facing side set of services, of course, which are multi-platform. Many of our clients have said we need support on the network side. We're not sure what to do relative to CDNs and things like that. We had those conversations with Akamai, and it made perfect sense for both of our companies to come together and provide that end-to-end solution.
Great. Okay, Brian Markwalter, what has been the consumer reaction to 4K TV thus far? You touched on it a little bit before, but I thought you might throw in some more details.
Sure, maybe we went through some of that material pretty quickly. I did talk about the experience that consumers have when they see it at retail. We actually did intercepts of consumers who saw demos at retail, so that's how we have some of that data. But I think if you look at where we are now with Ultra HD and compare to HD, we're really quite far along for essentially a year and a half into this. If you look at the term familiarity we had there, so one thing we've mentioned in the in the past. HDTV, we're now at basically 100%. I mean, it's at 97%. The piece that's not in here is the term TV is also at 97%. So HDTV and TV are equivalent in consumers' minds today. And Ultra HD is at 64%. That's really...
Could you put this on the overhead, please, so the audience can see it? This slide, just for a second while he's talking about it.
There we go. So up at the top, HDTV, we didn't put the term TV up there. It's equivalent, 97%. Those are one and the same to consumers now. Ultra HD, you know, it's down the list a little bit, but 64% is really high for a new technology that, you know, is shipped 100,000, well, more than that probably by now in the U.S. Units. And so I feel like we're in a pretty good position, and maybe that's because of HDTV. They sort of can get that, oh, you know, I know this is the next kind of quality picture that we have. So, you know, I think that puts us in a good position. The fact that we now have internet distribution that's all digital now, we're not trying to do an analog, you know, to digital transition, sets us up to do more creative things like serve niche markets.
Okay, another quick Mark Walter CEA question. We hear reports of very large numbers of 4K TV shipping worldwide, but moderate growth in the U.S. What's going on?
Yeah, and John may want to talk about some of the numbers they're seeing. So we actually, what I'm talking about there is if you read headlines, you'll see some numbers for worldwide sales that are really super high, like 10 million. And there's no slide on this one, but there's a bunch going into China, we understand, but we have very strong growth in the U.S., but it's also clear that the Ultra HD TVs that are shipping here seem to be meeting a minimum definition for quality, upscaling, and capability, and actually being able to natively take in Ultra HD or 4K content and display it. But in terms of our numbers, so we revised upward last year's numbers to 77,000. So that was just a partial year market. This year we're just under 500,000, and then you saw the numbers go up from there. John, I don't know if you want to add.
Could we bring up this slide, and then I'm going to switch to the next one after John gets started? Okay, John, please.
Well, as a follow-up to Brian's estimate of about 500,000 units sold this year, we're even more bullish than that. I mean, you mentioned 77,000 units last year. To get to 500,000 this year is huge growth. We're thinking it's going to be 950,000 to perhaps even 1 million units sold in the United States in 2014 because of the explosion in the number of products available by more and more brands, the broadening into other screen sizes, and bringing the prices down to bring it to more affordable and more attainable ultra-high definition for consumers.
Great. Any other comments as to the projections or numbers? In which case we'll go to Vince. Vince Pizzica, can you share the type of investments Technicolor is making to support 4K?
Yeah, we've been investing in the 4K and other variations that we've talked about, Wider Color Gamut, high dynamic range, for quite some time now. It's our role to be an innovator. We ride these waves of innovation. So we look at this ecosystem from the production services side all the way through the distribution, whether the physical disc is going to need to evolve for Blu-ray, OTT services, what's going to have to be done on HEVC. That's the full gamut of all the things we need to look at. So today we're making investments in our OTT, direct-to-consumer service called MGO. We're launching 4K delivery services there. We've been working on the production environment with all the major studios in Hollywood on 4K workflows. So our investments are quite substantial in 4K. But we continue to believe that there's a lot more to be done. It's like another 5 to 10 years of innovation that's still required, and laying down a lot of... It's important to us to lay down the IP that can be then embedded and made as open as possible, because we think that unless the ecosystem is open, unless the content can be played on the devices, unless people can get access to the technology in an inexpensive way, then it won't be successful.
We asked this question before in the sense of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the software or the hardware, and I think we came to a collective decision that probably best be described as both. They work together. Yet, how does a company like Technicolor, and I encourage Darcy after this to answer it briefly too, manage that process between hardware and software and make sure that all the technology works together when it comes to rolling out a new technology like 4K? Vince Pizzica.
Yeah, as I said, it's in our roots to be at that crossroads. You know, we are in the production services environment. We are on the delivery side. It's in our nature to be thinking about that ecosystem completely from the beginning. And we identified probably about 5 or 6 years ago, in general, not just on this trend, that user experience is really what drives take-up around this. So we always start from those fundamental questions of how is the user experience going to be, and work backwards from that towards what investments we need to make, or what needs to change in the ecosystem. So that's for us, without the hardware there is no service, without the software and the content there is no service. So it's pretty obvious, I think, but at the same time, what you have to do to make sure those things come together at the right time is a bit more challenging.
Darcy.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate because we, as a licensing company that works with some 200 content relationships, as well as managed services and tech solutions capability, we do kind of sit right in the middle of both of those stakeholders and participate with both. So we spend a lot of time, to Vince's point, taking the same methodology, working backwards with our client base, and looking at what is the ultimate consumer offering when you talk about things like electronic sell-through, right? Which are new offers that are in the digital space being added to all forms of transactional, whether it's transactional on demand or subscription services, right? Over the top or more traditional. We get asked those questions of what does the infrastructure need to look like, and work with our partners basically to deliver that. And then our back-end infrastructure is informed by that, a la the things we're doing right now with the cloud. So.
Great. Vince Roberts, a couple quick questions and quick answers for you. What are your plans to produce content in support of 4K UHD?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. Currently it's from ABC Studios, the Marvel. I think it's 6 shows, I think it's what we said, for Netflix. Past that, not a lot in the pipeline that would be specifically for UHD. It's again, I've said it before, I'm short of sounding a bit like a stuck record. It's about the business model, and we've got to make sure that there's a value proposition for us to make that investment.
Great. And important specific part of that question is, within the animation space, are there any special opportunities or risk in delivering 4K?
Actually, it's less risky in the animation space because, as I mentioned, we're already rendering and finishing our content in 4K because the production capabilities are much more robust and our special effects issues are much more easily handled. So we have actually quite a library TV animation. I won't speak for the motion picture studio except that I know that they already have rendered content that's already in that space. It's a matter of conforming it and converting it to the UHD spec. And the same thing for my TV animation group. We have the same issues about just repackage and reset the metadata and pump the file out because it's already being produced at that resolution.
Great. John Taylor, along with CEA, LG knows the consumer pretty well. Can you talk to us a little bit about early reactions from early buyers of 4K?
The initial reactions, Jimmy, have been tremendous. Even when we launched the first Ultra HD TV in October of 2012, it was $25,000, an 84-inch behemoth. Absolutely gorgeous, but not in everybody's price range, to say the least. But it's aspirational, and people loved it, and I think that was a good on-ramp for looking at what you can find in the stores today. 55 and 65-inch Ultra HDs in the $4,000 to $6,000 range are widely available today, and later this year they're going to be in the 49 to 50-inch range at around $2,000. So you're going to start to see more consumers embracing Ultra HD as they experience it in the store, and that's where the retailers come in. We work very closely with retailers to help make sure that consumers are able to experience it properly in the store.
Great. We are going to go to your questions. I hope to get one, maybe two in here, but I'm going to ask the lady and the gentleman, any other comments on what we talked about in terms of general categories or other topics that you think we need to hit in this area of home entertainment? Any other thoughts here?
I think
Vince Pizzica.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment which I think we hinted at or some of us mentioned, but just to re-emphasize it, one of the trends that's really strongly coming in the market is the ways in which sensors and wearable technologies are starting to collect a lot of information about the audiences. And if we talk about where the next generation of home entertainment is, understanding more about the audience that's in front of the content at the time is going to allow better experiences. And I think, therefore, better experiences are going to end up being attractive to consumers. So that's, I think we probably haven't talked about it much, but I think that's a trend that it will also be very successful in the next 4 or 5 years, that we'll see a lot of services having lean back personalization.
Great. Hold on, John.
Oh, sorry.
Vince first.
Just add one on to Vince's thoughts on just that viewer experience. Something we really haven't talked about, and perhaps we don't have necessarily the time, but it's about viewing distance and visual acuity. So there is going to be a discussion at some point. I believe in fact there is a panel here at NAB with a specialist on visual acuity and what the human eye can really see at what given distance. So as you look at higher resolution, it has an implication that you've got to be closer to the screen, which is just the mathematical constant of the Schnellen issue and how you categorize human visual acuity. So there's going to be that discussion that's going to have to come out, especially so that we're not disenfranchising the consumer and selling them something that, oh gee, at 10 feet I really can't see that resolution as well as you could if you were 6 feet away from a screen of any given size. So there's a lot of math, there's a lot of science about that, but I think that's something that from a consumer standpoint we're going to have to make sure that they're educated on what does it mean to have the correct viewing distance to get the true experience.
But you're not going to move your couch. I'm sorry, you're not going to move your couch. You're just going to get a lot bigger picture.
So in that context, if you're 10 feet away, what size screen do you need to see it? 115 inches. That's like a king-size bed on the wall. That's like hanging a Lexus, you know. It's like I got a ES350 hanging on my wall.
Yeah. So way down the line, we may be talking about having to communicate and work with the building trade so that they build rooms and living.
There you go.
And all that. Okay, Darcy.
Need a contract.
I think two things, and we touched on it a lot. There is Ultra HD as we have it today, but there is nothing to be compared with as we get into new standards and a color space that quite honestly more closely replicates what the human eye can see, which is the direct draw. So back to the quality, it isn't the number of pixels, it's the quality of pixels. I mean, for those of you that have seen high dynamic range, and have seen a color palette on screen that you've actually never seen before, that does replicate more closely what your eye is able to see. It is stunning. So taking that into account, I think the other thing it kind of in parallel is you have this great experience, now marry it to all of the options and ways that you're ultimately going to bring it to that very large, potentially, screen that you might be viewing from. And for me, that rolls into the role of our devices that will participate as hubs and distribution points onto the display. And then what are the technical considerations that we need to think about relative to ensuring that we preserve what's now an incredible experience from, I don't have my cell phone on me, but from ultimately a device that has a chipset in it that can render live onto the screen with that kind of resolution and enhanced expanded color gamut. Those are things that I think are going to be also pretty fascinating to work on.
Yep. Hear, hear.
So quite a future ahead. John Taylor, LG.
My parting shot on this last question. We've talked a lot about the consumer hardware. We've talked about the programming, and you touched briefly on things like over-the-top TV and what's happening in cable and satellite. but we haven't really talked about the role for terrestrial broadcasting. And I think it's important to look ahead. There's a lot of great work going on with what's called ATSC 3.0, which will, among many other things in this flexible and extensible system, will include the robust delivery of 4K content. And my company and many others are heavily involved, and we urge more and more broadcasters to get involved in that process as well.
Would you help finance that for us?
No comment.
Okay.
Didn't bring my checkbook today.
Okay, we're going to do one more quick audience question about the topic John Taylor from LG just mentioned, and it is over-the-top streaming online video will dominate, i.e. over-the-top will be used at least 51% of the time in at least 51% of U.S. television households. By what time frame? How many in the audience believe that that over-the-top will hit the dominant position of 51% by 2015? Anybody a real optimist? Oh boy, we have about 5 in a room of about 200. Okay, how many by 2017? Over the top becomes dominant. Okay, a bigger number, I'd say about 10. How many by 2020? Over the top becomes dominant. Okay, I'd say more than half of the audience. And what about beyond 2020? Okay, again, a smaller number, maybe 10. Okay, real quick, just one answer, yes or no. Starting with John Taylor coming down the road. Do you agree or disagree with the audience when they talk about the later numbers? John, do you think it's sooner or later?
I think it's about right in the middle.
In the middle. Vince Roberts.
I agree with John.
Oh, I have a feeling. Yeah, we're going to go right down the road.
Approaching.
Yeah. Brian Markwalter, are you going to be a protagonist?
Never disagree with the audience.
Okay, and Darcy?
Pass.
Okay, good. Pass is sometimes the best. And before I close today with a couple of audience questions, I just want to thank the AV and the people back here at the back, Wendy and the like. Thank you very much. Okay, sir, could you identify yourself quickly and give us a quick answer, or a quick question?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Mike Heiss, Residential Systems. With the caveat that I'm a big proponent of 4K, I think we're all suffering from amnesia here. Anyone who was in this room 15 years ago knows that people didn't buy HD TV sets because the picture was better. John, you were there. They bought them because after June 12, 2009, if you didn't have a DTV set, you couldn't watch TV.
Right.
In the absence of a change to the broadcast standard, in the absence of standards, that there's no table of 18. The stuff isn't here. How are the content owners, producers, creators, distributors going to get past the early adopters to convince them that Rec 2020 and 4K and things that they don't understand are good?
Great. Thank you, Michael. Great question. Quick answer by one of our panelists, please, because we have several more questions here. Vince Roberts, I'm going to volunteer you.
Going to volunteer me? Oh, good. I think it's about making sure that consumer expectations are met. That if you see, as Darcy pointed out, when you see the rich capability of the 2020 color space to be able to get more of what true visual acuity can do in that color space, not so much in resolution, that will drive consumer uptake. And in my estimation, it's about consumer uptake and that value proposition that makes them want to go out and buy a set that has this incredible capability.
When is Disney going to...
Michael, can you say that into the microphone so the people listening...
When is Disney going to stake ESPN to a 4K 10-bit 2020 capable remote fan so that you can bring this to the consumers and create a reason for them to buy the sets?
Well, I might almost go back and ask, how many TV sets in the 4K today are being made with a 2020 capable color gamut space? Most of them are 709, so you're going to be throwing away bits ultimately at the end of the day. I'm not going to speak for ESPN. My colleague Chuck Pagano can do that. But quite frankly, that's part of the disconnect. I'm sorry, I'm covering my eyes, you can see it. Part of the disconnect is that you've got all these sets that are being built in 709. If I come out with 2020, then the consumer's going to have to go out and do what? Buy another TV set? That's probably good news for you guys, but at the end of the day, that doesn't scale very well in my mind on how this is going to roll out.
Okay, we're going to go to this gentleman. Could you ID yourself quick?
Sure. My name is Karen Maliki Sanchez. I'm with Constant Change Media. We're a content production company in Hollywood, California. I'm just going to speak as a consumer.
Quick question, please.
Yep, that's me IDing. So here's, I'm a Time Warner customer for a long time, and I'm learning about Comcast coming into the area and wanting to take over Time Warner, and I wonder if I'll be able to still watch Netflix, and I'm wondering how 4K is going to allow me to still watch Netflix in the near future.
Volunteers?
Beyond the ATSC
I'm not
idea.
sure what the
Yeah, I would suppose there's, there will not be an impact relative to.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of still accommodating current video standards and high definition and things like that, those are not being compromised at the expense, or they are not at the expense of a 4K offer.
I mean that Comcast is introducing to Hollywood, for example, consumers, the idea of data capping, the fact that we're going to have, that's what I'm talking about, that all of a sudden we're going to be meeting limits on how much bandwidth we can get before we start paying premiums on it.
Yeah, I would be
Thank
upset
you.
with that too.
Should ask Comcast.
Short.
That's what I mean. They should be part of this.
The Comcast question.
Can't speak for Comcast, but I think they've already indicated that they're doing some sort of commercial deals with Netflix, and really, I think it's really a commercial decision that Comcast will make at the times, because it actually costs money to invest in access networks to carry these files. They're big, so there has to be some sort of trade-off between where the revenues are going to come and the cost of delivering.
Okay, I'm sorry we don't have any more time for additional questions from the audience. Could you bring up the final slide, please? We looked at some home video trends. Trends is an appropriate way to end this session, I think, because it takes us into the future. And we're looking at wall screen projectors, improved sound, cloud content, enhanced cord cutting, virtual reality and artificial intelligence, and curved screens. And I'm just going to ask each of the panelists, starting with John and working their way to Darcy, to just give me a short 30-second comment on any of these or additional trends as we close the session.
I think you've nailed a lot of them here. We talked earlier about curved screens and cloud content. We talked about enhanced cord cutting. I think smart TV cuts across many of these. It's the fastest growing segment of our industry. You're going to see a lot more activity in that area with interactive apps, and including some interesting opportunities for broadcasters to get involved.
Great. Vince Roberts, Disney.
Sure. I spoke earlier about our belief in what cloud environments can do for both our workflows and for our content distribution. I think as we continue to exploit those capabilities, you're going to see hopefully next year at NAB, if you remember a couple of years ago, they had a sort of the cloud pavilion, which is about the size of this stage. Now go through most of the vendors, and there's cloud offerings and cloud opportunities pretty much becoming across the board for much of that is from post-production all the way through distribution. So that has huge implications for us to drive not just efficiencies but revenues going forward in the future.
Vince Pizzica, Technicolor.
Yeah, look, I think augmented and immersive experiences are definitely the trend for the next 5 to 10 years. Lots of issues right across the value chain, lots of opportunities. I think it's going to be very exciting to watch them unfold.
Thank you. Brian Markwalter.
Okay, so I'll pick one that wasn't addressed. There was a great demo of a ultra short throw wall screen projector at CES this year that I think can help us see what might be in the future when we talk about these really large screens that you can accomplish without having to figure out how to carry in a physical display that big. So it does get past some of this issue of how are you going to do a screen that is that big to be truly immersive. Plus there'll be some really creative things you can do with all that display real estate.
Great. Darcy.
I'd probably add 3 things to that list. I'd add new forms of advertising. I'd add personalization. To me is a term that's overused. I would call it personalized programming. And then probably the additional thing that I would add is new monetization options relative to really new offers and new forms of consumption. So those are probably 3 things I'd add to that list.
Okay, and I've got to say this is without a doubt the best panel I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Please help me to congratulate them.
Thank you. Well done.
Vince, great job.
Great meeting.
Really.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you.
Good to see another Vince.